Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Swiss banker Egon von Greyerz of Matterhorn Asset Management and goldswitzerland.com. Egon, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Great to be here again, Max. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here and visiting us from the mountains of Switzerland. Yeah. All right, so Egon, let's have your input on this. This is a chart we were discussing in the first half of the show. This shows credit expansion and GDP flat, not going anywhere. What's going on? Can you comment on this?
Yes, this is called the law of diminishing returns, or in simple layman's terms, pushing on a string. You cannot, like Krugman thinks, and like most people in the city here behind us in London, you cannot create wealth by printing endless pieces of paper that have no value. And this is what governments are doing worldwide. And obviously, you reach a point when GDP is not going up anymore because that money is worthless that is being printed to drive it up. Now, if you also measure GDP with proper inflation rather than the published inflation, GDP would be coming down rather than up. Real GDP.
Well, there's a couple of points there. First of all, you're talking about you can't create prosperity by printing lots of money. But we live in an economy going back, 100 years, 150 years, where credit creation is definitely part of an expanding economy. But what's happened is that it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this business cycle that used to be around, where you would have credit creation, then you'd have an oversupply of goods and services, and then prices would come down, and you'd have a credit contraction, and that's been seeming like those laws of economic reality have been overridden by this mantra that no matter what the climate is, just keep the credit spigots open. Doesn't matter what's going on, just keep the credit flowing. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement, of course, and this started in 1913 when the Fed was created. Since then, we have seen endless money printing and credit creation, and that has, of course, gone exponential since 1971 when Nixon abolished the backing of the dollar with gold. And therefore, you just take, since the early 1990s, world debt has doubled. Since 2008, world debt is up by 70 trillion roughly, which is almost 50%. Almost 50%. We had a crisis. They tried to solve it by printing endless amounts of money and giving more credit. That crisis is bigger now, and debt is bigger than it was when the crisis started. And that's what this system creates. As you said before, if you abolish all the central banks, which you should do, and if actually demand and supply would govern markets, we would never have these massive bubbles. And today we have the biggest bubble ever in world history. Worldwide bubble.
Well, you mentioned that this has been going on really, you go back almost 100 years, the 1913 period, the creation of central bank in the U.S. So it's a behavior that's quite entrenched in the way people think. They've used this trick many times before to get out of economic difficulties by opening up that credit spigot.
Yeah.
So the question is, from the other side of the argument, they'll just say, look, this has worked for us for 100 years. We've never not had success in just opening up this credit spigot and allowing it. But it just seems that these GDP numbers, finally, it's just not working anymore. But how do you get folks to accept the fact that maybe the prescription they've been using for so long is just is no longer working?
They won't accept it. The world will not accept it because the world is used to now. Governments, the way I look at governments is that what they're doing with this money is buying votes. That's all they're doing. They're keeping the people happy and buying more votes. Austerity, we know, does not work in any single country. When they try it in Greece or in Spain or in Italy, there'll be strikes, there'll be marches, protests, because people are now used to being taken care of by the state. And therefore, sadly, it cannot be stopped now. Money printing will continue. It will not solve anything. The debt will be bigger, and eventually, I am convinced we will have, I hate the word QE because I think it's just an artificial word that they tell the people that's something fancy. It's really money printing as far as I'm concerned. And money printing will escalate in the next few months or year all countries will print, from the US to Japan to China to Europe, and we will have even more inflation, leading, I think, to hyperinflation eventually. So there will be, there's no other, there's nothing else governments can do. They don't know any other solution. There isn't a solution right now to this problem. And we will have a collapse of the system.
Right, so in other words, they're not willing to change their behavior, but so we're walking right into a collapse. And that's the only way the behavior will be changed, because you'll have a fundamental global financial collapse. Now, I want to kind of talk about something here that, what we've just described has been going on for a few years. We've talked about it on the show a couple of times, but since then we've got something new in the mix: negative interest rates. So in Switzerland, actually, they've got this. They've tried it. They're doing it. It's negative. Explain just first of all what it is. How do you experience it? What does this mean? NIRP, negative interest rate policy, and how did this happen?
Well, they have it in Swiss. I have 2 passports. I was born in Sweden, and I'm Swiss also. And both those countries have negative interest rates.
Oh, so you're the common denominator.
I am.
Egon von Greyerz, wherever he goes, rates go negative. I suppose in Britain will now experience negative interest rates.
It is ridiculous negative interest rates. You are actually, in the end, you can have a mortgage and they pay you to take the mortgage. I mean, this is what that tells you. Well, because governments there's too much money flowing into a country, and the consequence is that people are not going to get a return on their money. How can you invest if you can't get the return on the money? And Switzerland, having negative interest rates, they don't want an inflow into the Swiss franc, of course, because they don't want a strong Swiss franc. They've had a strong Switzerland. We've had a strong Swiss franc for decades and decades, and it's been extremely beneficial to the country, the most prosperous country in Europe. But the new type of the Swiss central bankers, they think they're hedge fund managers, and they think that they can manipulate the economy. So they have the biggest balance sheet in the world in relation to GDP. Switzerland has about 85% Swiss National Bank's balance sheet in relation to GDP. The US has 25%.
What's the argument now against holding gold? Because it used to be that, well, gold has no return and you pay storage fees. Yeah. But if you put it in the bank and they take 1% out every year, why? I mean, you brought along some gold. Thank you very much. This is an interesting gold trinket, little gold seeds. So if I plant this into the ground, it'll grow a gold tree?
No, but it will grow in value.
Fair enough. But what's the incentive? What's the incentive then for not putting cash into gold? Why would I put it in a bank if the bank's why would I put money in a bank if they're just going to confiscate 1% or whatever through negative interest rates?
Yes. No, nobody would put money into the bank. You're right. And therefore, the world cannot function with negative interest rates because you get no return on your money. So the difference if you're asking me, of course, money it has been destroyed in the last 100 years, paper money in every country, by 97 to 99% in purchasing power or against gold.
In purchasing power, but they haven't actually gone in and just stolen money through these negative interest rates. ABS is a bank, the first in Switzerland to introduce negative rates on customers with small deposits. Thus far, only the big institutional clients have been hit. So now this is trickling down to the retail customer.
Retail. Big customers already have had it, and now it's getting to small customers. Absolutely. So there's no incentive whatsoever to hold money, especially not since, as I said, money will also be destroyed by credit creation and money printing.
What about people who are benefiting from the bubble in housing prices due to the cheap interest rates? You mentioned mortgage rates are going to be, they're paying you to take a housing price. Is that a refuge for savings? Is that a good place to be? What's going to happen there?
Sadly, it is. People don't understand what they're doing because they're paying. I mean, in Switzerland, Austria, you can get a 20-year mortgage for 1.25% roughly. 20-year mortgage, it costs nothing. The people don't even look at the annual cost. But house prices are shooting up into the sky, and that's creating the biggest bubble in property in many European countries.
Right. So when you go to sell that house because you need cash, suddenly there's no bids.
There's no bids, and plus a lot of people will have lost their jobs also if things go the way that I think they will. So you'll have no job. And you can't pay your mortgage.
Housing is not really an investment class as such because it's not liquid. It's not a cash equivalent the way
Not
governments
at
believe
all.
it is.
And you have bubbles anyway. I mean, actually, you take London. In London, if you pay a top price for a property, you can pay $200 million, $250 million for a property, and then you can buy a painting. This goes there's another asset of the rich. You can buy a painting, a Picasso, for example, or a Gauguin, for another $250 million. So for $500 million, you get an apartment with one painting in it. That's what's happened in the world today. You know, the money printing has created enormous wealth for 0.1% or less of the people. The rest are just getting more debt. That will never be repaid, of course.
Now, in China, of course, the government has been selling their treasury, U.S. Treasury paper, and they've been buying a lot of gold. Russia's been buying gold.
And selling treasury paper also. Russia, yeah.
Tell us about that trend. How much is that going to expand, do you think?
I think it definitely, all of these governments know, they know that the dollar is the next currency to come down, because you cannot be the reserve currency in the world when you're also the most indebted country in the world, and when you actually haven't had a budget surplus since the early 1960s, and you haven't had a trade surplus since the 1970s. So therefore, the dollar will very soon, in my view, in the next few months at least, start coming down, and coming down dramatically.
Well, the thing that backed the dollar for so long, as many on this show have said, is the Pentagon.
Yeah.
But it seems we've hit peak Pentagon.
Yes, yes.
If you know what I mean.
No, absolutely. No, I mean, what is happening now in Syria, I mean, that is extremely interesting geopolitically, of course.
It doesn't vote. That's not good for the dollar.
I mean, gold will reflect this money printing and what's going to happen to the dollar. This gold, this is 1 gram pieces. That's $40.
Thank you, Egon. Thank you so much.
That's too quick. No, you will have, yeah, okay. Well, that will be $400 at least in today's money, but it might also be $4 million or $4 trillion in future money one day. But that's not real money, of course, but it will preserve your wealth. Your paper money will never preserve your wealth. That is for certain.
Oh, let's keep the plastic. Anyway, we got to go. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max. A pleasure.